I am making this video for the Mental Health Commission of Canada, for COTA Mental Health, for the Across Boundaries Mental Health, for the Social Justice Tribunal, the Attorney General of Ontario, the Minister of Health in Ontario, and for the Federal Minister of Health and the federal government. My health is very poor, and I almost died this winter time. Being a former homeless man, every single day being threatened with being thrown in the streets in freezing weather. I have attempted to fight this in a court of law, but my health took a turn for the worse, and I was in the hospital on July 28th. After Capri Property Management filed a false complaint against me that I posted up campaign signs on the public roadway, and they were handwritten with the words peace and love. They were written on materials just as this: wood, discarded waste, because I am an environmentalist, and also because I do not have the financial resources. I have a physical disability. That physical disability is what leads to my mental health issues, because pain does affect the mind. That's how I became a client of COTA Mental Health from my days of being a homeless man in the city of Toronto, sleeping on steam crates underneath bridge and in freezing weather. How I end up in housing, but most of the housing are normally housing run by slumlords or improperly maintained. These programs do not attempt to get people into housing that is respectable to ordinary citizens. They treat them as if they are less. The problem with your COTA Mental Health and your cross-boundaries agencies is that they start the discrimination against their clients. If a client was stabbed or was hurt on the street and their COTA worker was present and they had a vehicle, they are not allowed to drive their client to the hospital because they judge their client as having mental health issues that may lead to violence or illegal acts. Those are the judgments of these agencies. Why you have so many people alleged mentally ill on the streets of Toronto, on the streets all across the province of Ontario and in Canada. My case arises to where I filed a large amount of complaints against COTA. Well, let's start at Silver Springs, since that was brought up in this case. And my mental health worker seems to think that because you have the mental health file, whatever anyone says against you is true, and whatever you say, you must curb, and is wrong. So in Silver Springs, they have a despicable maintenance issue. I filed all those issues with the City of Toronto. In turn, the property manager came back on me. In turn, my COTA Mental Health agencies was working with the property manager to curb my behavior of filing complaints where there is improper maintenance or illegal acts. Those are things somebody on a mental health program or on a housing program or on subsidy do not do. You should be thankful that we got you housing. Doesn't matter the condition of it or the maintenance of it. And you don't have the right to speak. You don't have the right to complain because you have a mental health issue, so whatever you say does not matter. Mental health does not mean mindless. So in Silver Springs, after all these repairs were ordered by the city, the landlord decided to fabricate a story using mental health allegations to have the police arrested me on a false assault charge after they assaulted me. But in turn, they had the witnesses. They had my mental health workers to go over my mental health issue, and they had the super, and they had other people who can say, well, yes, even though they were not there. I was banned from my housing, even though I was continually paying rent and all my expenses were escalating. My cats were left at home to where nobody would take care of them, and with no assistance from my COTA mental health worker to fight it legally, even though I gave them all the documentation to show that the landlord was wrong and that the landlord was the one that was breaking the law. Eventually, the courts saw through all that, and the courts dismissed the charges in 2015. But the problem we had then was that we still was in the landlord and tenant court, and we had won our fight against Silver Springs. But the problem was, due to the extreme cold of the weather, to save my life, we had to seek other housing alternative because I was legally banned by a court order from the Ontario government from going to my housing, even though I did not commit any crime, all because there was allegation of mental health issues. So from there, we rent a premise at 4000 Lawrence Avenue East, and through our COTA worker. But our COTA worker was not the one who got me into this housing. It was my friend Sam Colas. He is the friendliest landlord and the largest property manager in Canada. I met Sam when I was a homeless man, and if it was not for Sam Colas, after the actions of my COTA mental health worker from across boundaries, and after the abuse I received from Capri Property Management and the neglect from the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario to maintain my rights from false allegations due to mental health applications or files I have, I thank Sam Colas dearly. I am alive to make this video today because of him. I thank you, Sam, and I thank you dearly. So now it gets us up to 4000 Lawrence. Oh, to summarize, Silver Springs, we had a choice. I could have moved back to Silver Springs, but we had just signed a lease for a year. The landlord said they didn't want me back, but the court says you have no choice because you did wrong against this man. So they entered into a mediation agreement that I will give up Silver Springs. I will give up Silver Springs. And in return, they made a financial sum settlement. But then they wanted me to sign a paper that said none of their years and nobody associated with them will be liable, right? As long as they abide by the mediation order and nobody is claiming any wrongs. But in turn, I gave up Silver Springs because I was put in a position where I was wrongfully accused of an illegal act, and the courts proved that those accusations were lies and were fabricated due to my mental health housing application. But in turn, I was tortured on the streets of Toronto for 6 months in freezing cold weather. I am the chief financial officer and the interim leader of one of only 20 political parties in Ontario. My workers at COTA Mental Health and the Cross Boundary says, oh my God, you have a mental health issue. You can't do that. Are you serious? You could be Premier of Ontario? It is not likely. But I am one of the candidates in the race for the Premier of Ontario because I am one of the 20 leaders of a political party in Ontario. And the majority of seats won in the House by a political party, their leader becomes the Premier. So if our party files 122 seats and win the majority of them, I would be Premier of Ontario. Yes, so you see, do not judge people because of allegations of mental health issues. I am also a candidate for Toronto Mayor. I placed 7th out of 26 candidates against the longest-serving Mayor, Melvin Douglas Lastman. In the last election, I was in the top half of the field of 65 candidates. But my mental health worker from across boundaries says, no, that is not so. So on July 29th, while I was in the hospital, and my worker called me and I informed him I was in the hospital, our first appearance on the case that Capri could only have won if I end up dead, was in the hospital, or if there was no Charter of Rights in Canada. And rather than inform the judge and state that Mr. Clarke was in the hospital, they proceeded with the case. And even though there was all sorts of different illegal acts that was done in the adjudication of the case, it came down to an issue of election campaign signs. And why is Mr. Clarke posting up these signs? And does he have a mental health issue that possesses him to do it? Oriana, lessard, my social worker, who in turn is now breaching my privacy with the Mental Health Commission, when she takes a stand and not testify in my behalf, and when she's asked to the stand, not saying, well, Your Honor, this is odd that Mr. Clarke would not be here. Mr. Clarke is always there to face all his accusers. I would suggest that we hold this matter down and call Mr. Clarke to see his whereabouts. Mr. Clarke does have a health issue. Maybe he ran into an health problem. Ms. Lessard didn't say that. Ms. Lessard, next, could have said, well, Mr. Clarke's worker is here, but Mr. Clarke is not present. So why don't we bring the worker up to find out as he spoke to Mr. Clarke? That is what a judge should do and would do. And that's what a worker who has interest in the client would do. But Ms. Lessard didn't do that. Ms. Lessard says, I have knowledge of Mr. Clarke, when she's asked by the judge. Okay, so you have knowledge of Mr. Clarke. So he's posting up all these signs. Could there be a mental health issue? Ms. Lessard, if she has knowledge of Mr. Clarke, like anyone who does, know that Kevin Clarke is a numerous time candidate for municipal, provincial, and federal government. They can Google Kevin Clarke and see his political history. But no, Ms. Lessard did not say Mr. Clarke is a candidate for public office. That's why he's posting the sign. Ms. Lessard discriminated against Mr. Clarke and used his mental health housing file and record, and to say, yes, we could not curb his behavior because of his mental health issue that possesses him to do this. Elections Ontario, elections Toronto, and the federal elections, they can, what's the word you would use? They can verify that Mr. Clarke has been a registered candidate minimum 5 times for mayor, 9 times for provincial member of parliament, 4 times for federal member of parliament, twice for Toronto City Councillor. So even though he is a client of the Mental Health Commission, he is also a candidate for public office. Ms. Lessard says she works with landlords. Should she not work with the landlord and the client? There was no concern about my life, about my rights, about my health, about my safety. Zero. But yet, Ms. Lessard, a mental health worker, would go in the court of law and lie, number one, about the eviction of Silver Springs when we had left and gave up Silver Springs due to the fact that I was wrongly accused of a criminal act because they wished to remove me from the premise for filing complaints with the City of Toronto about their improper maintenance, repair, and safety issues. And at 4000 Lawrence Avenue, the same situation arises, and Ms. Lessard should be fully aware of those situations if she knew Kevin Clarke. But she would testify that this man, who has done such great service for the people of Ontario, his behavior is created due to mental health issue. That's discrimination for Ms. Lessard, and all should know that Mr. Clarke's behavior in putting up campaign signs is related to his candidacy for public office, which is guaranteed under the Canadian Charter of Rights. Ms. Lessard will say, well, Mr. Clarke, his mental health issue possesses him to pay kids to clean up the parks. It possesses him to go send people downtown to feed the hungry. It possesses him to create gardens for children, for hope. It possesses him to have children's festival. No, Ms. Lessard, it's not a mental health issue that possesses me to do that. It is my social value that possesses me to do that. For because I am on a mental health housing program, it does not mean that I am mindless, I am hopeless, or any less. because I am a servant of God Almighty, and I do love all humanity of good spirit and all of creation. Your discrimination, Miss Lessard, led to my near death. I have a degenerative back disease. That is my physical disability that creates mental issues. Because the pain, when the pain hurts, you cannot think straight. Didn't say you turn violent, you can't think straight. So you can't get basic day-to-day things done, such as your housework, such as dishes, such as making appointments. These are things you were put there to work with me and with others in that situation to deal with. But you went to work with slumlords so that if you give housing to us, then you can work with the slumlords to see that we're not a complainer and we're not somebody who's going to have the behavior of trying to make things better for others. We're not somebody who's going to try and engage the public or communicate with the other tenants. That is absurd. We ask all governments and all agencies that were mentioned at the start of this video to please investigate. Now, to make the case more damning, we believe that Ms. Lessard, a former property manager, is working for property managers, mainly slumlords, and she's getting guarantees of housing for these individuals, and in return, she will speak out against them if there's ever a dispute and use their mental health record. My last month deposit is missing from Silver Springs Boulevard. It was not brought to 4000 Lawrence. We believe that in our settlement, the money that Silver Springs agreed to pay to us, that Ms. Lessard divert that fund back to Silver Springs, or someone in the agencies back to Silver Springs. So in turn, my last month deposit was used to pay the landlord's settlement, which the landlord was supposed to pay himself, not through the COTA Mental Health program. Another issue is our floor in here. Ms. Lessard and COTA Mental Health and Across Boundaries has not made one attempt to assist in this wrongful eviction. I had to go through all the paperwork to get to divisional court, through all the appeal in the landlord and tenant board, and I had to ignore my health. I had to ignore my life and my responsibilities just to save my housing. But I found out in November, around that time, from my worker, Miriam, that Ms. Lessard, who's in charge of my subsidy through the COTA Mental Health, has decided that if you get evicted, that they will remove your subsidy. So I am somebody with an extreme disability, and you are going to stop my rental subsidy because you did a wrong. You falsely testified with false information from my mental health record and my housing record in front of the Social Justice Tribunal on July 28, 2016. And your testimony led to me being ordered evicted. And in turn, you're going to pull my disability subsidy and leave me on the streets to die. That is the first problem there. The second one is that you know that the landlord has filed a motion for March 14th to have my appeal dismissed. And if my appeal is dismissed, I can be evicted immediately. But yet finally, a couple of days before that eviction is to take effect, you agree that the landlord's maintenance of this floor is going to finally be done, which has taken over a year for the landlord to deal with that maintenance issue, just as many maintenance issues as 4000 Lawrence. And we asked for an investigation by the police forces in this city and this province of the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the Across Boundaries and COTA Mental Health Services, if in fact what I was told by the worker, that this work has been approved, but it is believed that the money will be paid through COTA Mental Health. This is not my responsibility to maintain flooring in a landlord's unit. because the landlord owns this unit, and if I leave, these flooring would remain. But if I leave and the flooring is not done, the landlord has to pay to maintain it, to rent it to another tenant. So why should I, the tenant, or my agency, be responsible to pay for the landlord's maintenance? We ask for an investigation as to see, is that a common practice of housing agencies and mental health agencies to use taxpayers' dollars and their clients' resources to in turn pay to fix up slumlords' premises. God is with us, and we ask for this wrongful eviction of Kevin Clarke to be dealt with by the municipal, provincial, and federal government.